Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. Today, I am here with David Zock. David is the lead singer and founder of the band Remedy Drive, and now he also does a partnership with the Exodus Road. And I think something you're going to take away from our conversation today is when David becomes passionate about something, he jumps all in. He's not going to just sit around and say someone else can do it. He jumps all in. So, David, thanks so much for being on today.
Yeah, Phil, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So I want to kick it off in the mid 1990s. You have a few brothers and you guys are musically inclined. And you said, well, what if we started playing some music together? So talk a little bit about, growing up and your introduction to music and the passion that came from that.
Well, we grew up in Omaha. My first memory of playing was a trio, me and my brother Philip, at a cabaret night at Westside High School. And we played The Sound of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel.
Yeah.
And I was a senior, I think, and we brought in my little brother who was like in seventh grade that played the drums. And I had started writing songs when I was like 13.
Yeah.
And wasn't really allowed to listen to rock and roll growing up. But started, I discovered the Smashing Pumpkins and
Yes.
Pearl Jam. The Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, that double disc. I had a friend actually gave the double disc.
Yep.
And music was so meaningful to me. Like, we listened to Keith Green. That was the only rock that was sanctioned in our house for a long time. And just the way that a melody combined with passion, he was a passionate guy.
Yeah.
It always moved me, but I just wrote for myself. I just wanted to write, and some of my friends would listen. And that's how it all started for us.
Yeah. So I think that's a interesting thing, right? It was more of a passion first. It didn't necessarily, and maybe you did, maybe you can elaborate on that, but I don't know if day one, when you started writing, you said, gosh, someday, I want this to be my career or not, but it just started off as a passion. When did you start formulating or thinking about it? Was that in the college ages, or earlier on, did you already think, well, maybe I could do this as a career?
It was almost too sacred to even whisper the idea of being able to go full time with music. Like, it wasn't something we ever even thought about.
Yeah.
My dad was always interesting, and this has stuck with me. But he said once, like, he's like, hey, when it started going bad for the Jackson 5 is when they started taking money.
Yeah.
I just, like, I've never said that in an interview before, but he was real concerned about the corruption that doing it for any other reason than just loving it would bring into it.
Yeah.
And that's true of all things. But
Yes.
so I never even considered, like, my dad did magic, did illusions all the way through his whole life, and he never once took money for it. And that was kind of cool. And there's a purity to it in that sense. And at the beginning, we didn't think that it was something we ever could charge for. So we did free concerts all the time at University of Nebraska Lincoln when we moved down there. But then towards the end of my college career, with a mathematics degree, I didn't know what else to do. And so it just kind of happened somehow.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about your time in Lincoln. I know you said, hey, we were doing grassroots marketing. We were putting flyers up, we were putting
Yeah.
things on tables and dorms. Like, we were just getting the word out, and we would play just about anywhere we would get invited to play. So, talk about the excitement that you had coming from that, and just, once again, the opportunities that were presenting themselves.
Well, we play out on the quad a lot, and I
Yeah.
loved that. I love I loved people that came to see us, but I also loved the people that walked by that stopped in their tracks and watched for 2 or 3 songs and then gave us a thumbs up when they went to class or when they had whatever they're going to. That to me, there's a thrill to that I'm, first of all, that I'm being really loud in the public square, and that somebody noticed, somebody that had no idea who we were before that noticed and appreciated it. And then some of those people are still around to this day from those concerts out on the quad, which is really cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, we put up posters. My brother Paul was still in high school, so we would drum as a trio, and we put up posters with his face, like hundreds of them all over the place. And it's just goofy faces. We were only called Remedy at the time.
That's awesome. Now, something that's interesting to me as you were talking, you said, "Hey, my dad would, perform magic and be a magician." There's probably a part of you that saw that and saw the entertainer part of it, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
one thing to do the trick, that's part of it, but the other part is the entertaining. So, were there any things that saw him do that you're like, all right, now that I'm moving
Uh,
into an entertainer spectrum, I want to kind of steal or use some of those things?
wow, that's a cool question. I never thought of my dad as an entertainer. Like the magic tricks were definitely a part of who he was. He was a preacher too.
Okay.
Um, and he had this one noise he made, like this. He'd make that sound when he'd be like, and sometimes it was like if someone would bothering you, like, "Yeah," there's a little, and he had so many like little things that were, the Mike Zock isms. Uh, and I think that because I never thought of it as entertainment because it was
Yeah.
so much more than entertainment. Like it, like, uh, and it took me a while to develop a comfort level behind a microphone,
Yeah.
especially without a guitar in my hands.
Mm.
But I looked to I mean, he was always nervous at the beginning of the shows. You can see that nervousness, and I was the same way. I was like focused just on this thing. You couldn't talk to me. I would not hear anything you're saying in the 20 minutes leading up to some of those early shows because all I was thinking about is trying to get ready for it.
Right. Yes. So as you mentioned, you are progressing, you're doing more and more shows, and then there comes an opportunity to start traveling. And so it's not just doing things inside of Lincoln, you're traveling. And I think you end up at some point driving all the way to the West Coast to do a performance. So talk about those opportunities to travel. And I think that's when maybe the formed idea of, hey, this could be more than just a hobby for us.
Yeah, going all the way out to the coast was special because we had friends that got us onto a couple campuses. We went
Yeah.
to San Luis Obispo, played Pismo Pier, and it was that same thrill and that same like maybe this is something we could actually do.
Yeah.
Um, but I never felt like we were allowed to. Like I never felt
Mm.
like I was allowed to do something other than what is prescribed for us. You know,
Yes.
4 years of high school, 4 years of college, maybe a master's, and then a 9 to 5. And I always knew there was people that did stuff like, but they must exist in a different sphere that did,
Yeah.
that that chase their dreams. And then at some point you just decide, why can't I chase my dreams too?
Yes.
Um, and it was never really conscious, but I think it was my older brother Dan that mentioned it the first time, like maybe we could do this. And we were roofing houses together. Um, Philip didn't get a scholarship because he tested too high on the ACT. Actually, it was weird. uh, where I got the Peter Kiewit scholarship for
Yeah.
like the B+ student that works hard that can demonstrate financial needs. It was like perfect. Um,
Yeah.
so he's roofing houses and hiring us to work with him. I was washing windows towards the end of my college career. I got trained on a high rise in downtown Lincoln, rappelling down.
Yeah.
And we did 3 shows in Nebraska that weekend that we had led up to working 2 weeks on a roof together. And financially, both of those endeavors were approximately the same amount of profit. So we're like, why
Wow.
don't we just figure out how not to do the roofs and
Yeah.
just do the concerts every weekend instead?
Yes.
And, and then it was just a ton of cold calling from then on out, just calling anybody and everybody. And when I got married, my wife and I, we she was a student at University of Nebraska Lincoln just for the sake of getting student health insurance. So she took one class a semester,
Smart. I love it.
which we went a month after we got married, where she was not insured. I don't understand how you can be so stupid as a kid, man. Uh, like that first month, like we would have got pregnant, we would have had anyone to pay for it. But so we'd go and she'd use her credentials. So we go in the computer lab and find contacts and call those contacts. That's how else. We didn't have a laptop. I didn't have a
Yeah.
cell phone.
That is great. I love it. The humble beginnings. That is Remedy Drive today. Now, with that, was it met with any opposition from people in your close circle once you graduated to not pursue a career in mathematics, right? What my degree is, and to pursue this musical endeavor, or did you have a lot of support?
My parents were so supportive.
Yeah.
They were so excited about it. They came to all the shows. Yeah, nobody that people thought it'd be like a 5-year type of thing, maybe,
Yeah.
but everybody is supportive.
Love it. So you end up getting on with a record label in Nashville. Not an easy feat to get in with a record label, but talk about that process and what that looked like for you to sync up with, someone that you felt like was going to help further your mission, but also that you aligned with.
So a employee of Warner Brothers at Word Records saw us in Omaha at the Rock. There used to be a venue called the Rock, and took our name back to other people at the label, and eventually this big bass player that played in a band called DC Talk, his name's Sugar Bear, Otto Price, it's the A&R guy, and he signed us and put me in a lot of rooms with a lot of writers.
Yeah.
Which is difficult. You can lose your soul that way.
Yeah.
You can lose who you are, because everybody has, their way of writing. And but somehow we were able to latch on to, I wrote all along with this guy named Jason Ingram, and Daylight I wrote on my own. There's a song called Heartbeat that our producer Ian Esklin jumped in with me on. So it was, the whole thing was, we were kind of recovering as a jam band. I didn't mention earlier that Dave Matthews and Fish were a big part of,
all right,
of the early days for me. But I'm thankful for our time at that record label, because they helped us write better pop songs, and it was a little too polished for my taste, the whole album. But it did put us on the map and get us in front of millions of people. Like millions of people hearing the music, and a lot of those people sticking around.
Now, something you just mentioned, and I want to highlight it, is a lot of the songs that you wrote then and that you're writing today are always very meaningful to you. And the Daylight song was one that was particularly meaningful because of what it was about. So just talk a little bit about what was the motivation behind that song, because it's pretty neat.
So my son Jack was a C-section, and my wife wanted to have Ava naturally, and we didn't know if it was a boy or a girl, but I loved that line from Bono, Yahweh, Yahweh, why so dark before the dawn, so much pain before a child is born. And that symbolism and imagery of wanting what's great, wanting a new birth, wanting everything to be made new, but at the same time being stuck in darkness and having to wait. And the psalmist saying, how long, like what? And we're there at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Lincoln, and I kept on telling my wife, like, hang on, we're gonna have this baby before sunrise. And it was after that long labor, risky to have a VBAC, or what is it? I think that's called. And so she came out. She was a little brown hair, tons of brown hair. And then I took her in the basement when we came home, and I finished Daylight, on the piano there, holding her in my arm and formulating the rest of the lyric. But a lot of it started with that real feeling and sense of expectancy that this is going to happen, and that hopefulness.
Yes. Now you and your brothers have been performing together, and I think it was around 2011. There's just ends up being a little bit of a shakeup in regards to the band and who's a part of it. And talk just a little bit about that. I mean, that's not uncommon, right? I mean, that's probably the story more times than not within bands, is that, switching or changing of roles. But how did that kind of come to be, and how did you guys continue to progress after that?
Well, it's uncommon for three brothers to leave at the same time.
Yeah, that is uncommon. Touche.
uh, I am thankful today because my dream for a band would be like what Coldplay and U2 has, and those are the only two bands I can think of that have it still, and that is the same four guys from the beginning. Because even the Killers are really unique right now. They go out with Brandon and Ronnie and Dave, and then other times, and then a bunch of players, and then sometimes it's Brandon and Ronnie only, and then sometimes it's Brandon, Ronnie, and the bass player, and their album covers are always different. And that's kind of how we are now too. But my brothers quit. It was dysfunctional.
Yeah.
Paul was fostering to adopt. He's adopted 4 kids now out of foster care. We had to play like 150 to 200 dates a year just to make $22,000 each a year.
Yeah.
And our managers and the label, everybody's making a ton of money. We're barely surviving. A lot of venues and sometimes pastors stole from us, didn't pay us. Just the stress of the label and all of it. And we didn't have a healthy way to manage any of that conflict, any of those decision-making processes. We didn't have a leader on the business front or even the creative front. And so we just fell apart. And the brothers gave me their blessing to go on. I found Timmy Jones and Corey Horn and Dave Moore. And we toured together 2 years, did another record at another record label. And then my heart started softening specifically towards my brother, Philip, who he and I had a lot of conflict creatively. And we reconciled in the most miraculous way. I can't even look back to know how it happened. And we haven't had an argument since. We have not had any, like we've made 4 or 5 albums together since then.
Yeah.
And I've given him creative control and he crushes it. Like somehow, for some reason, it took us breaking everything to realize that we did and always have had something really special together.
Yeah, that's neat. And to your point, it did continue on. You guys have done great things. I believe when I got to hear you play recently, he was actually there with you. So that was neat to see you guys playing together again.
And Timmy Jones was back there because he played with For King Country and a hip hop artist named Propaganda, and he plays with Chris Tomlin as well. But we're just kind of this collective now where those 3 guys that came in after the brothers left are constantly rotating in and out, and then Phil whenever he can too. I want to be it'd be awesome to be able to be a 5-piece, but maybe from time to time we will be.
I love it. So to talk about a pivotal moment for you, you and your daughter are sitting down watching a TV show, and she has a profound question to you. And this sends us on a whole nother trajectory of what David's about.
Yeah, it was 2012. And like you're looking for a pivotal moment, and then it is. And I don't believe, and I'm sure this is something that you'll be able to speak into, but I don't believe any pivotal moment just happens on its own.
Yes.
And this moment for me was built upon moment after moment after moment. I can put my finger on a lot of them that built up to this moment with my daughter. And we're watching Invisible Children's 2012 YouTube documentary that was the most viewed long form YouTube piece of all time, like that. And it had 30,000 views the morning I woke up on its release day. And we'd done a lot of Invisible Children fundraisers over the years. For those listening, Coney is a general that apparently hears from the Holy Spirit, and he's supposed to kidnap children and have this rebellion with the Lord's Resistant Army in Uganda. And at the time he had, I think, tens of thousands of child soldiers in his army, and he's just wreaking havoc all over the region. And there's sex trafficking and slavery of the worst forms of slavery. And my girl was 5. Ava's 5 years old. So it's only 5 years after daylight, which seems a lot happened in those 5 years. And she's watching that, and we're both crying. And she says, "Dad, why not God protect those boys?"
Mm.
And for me, that was the final straw of that moment for me that I realized my apathy is missing the mark in a tremendous way. My apathy towards injustice and the issues that the world's facing will be recorded and will be remembered by my daughter. But I still felt helpless, and I tweeted that out. Ava said, "Why not God protect those boys?" And a 16-year-old girl in Michigan tweeted me back and said, maybe you're being asked that same question. You have the
Wow.
power.
Yeah.
You have the power. You seem to care. You seem to, it breaks your heart. Why don't you do something? So that's how it started for me.
Yeah. Well, and so something that I want to highlight once again, and I know you have said this many, many times, but it's um, when you're aware of something, now it's your choice to either do something or not do something, but you're always going to be aware of it, right? And you say it much more eloquently than I did, but
I
talk a
steal it
little.
from Wilberforce.
Okay.
He said, you can choose to look the other way.
Yeah.
And this is an abolitionist that helped turn the tide in England on their laws. You can choose to look the other way, but you can never again say you did not know.
Yes.
And that's when people were starting to realize that their participation in the transatlantic slave trade, the kind of cruelty and the awful, miserable misery that they were causing by participating.
Yeah. So as you're entering into this, you say, all right, well, what can I do? Well, I have built a platform, right? And that is my music. So maybe I can start writing songs that will at least tie into this or speak into it. But that's met with some opposition from record labels for, we'll say, reasons that might be obvious. Odds are not big radio stations aren't going to want to play songs about this movement, but you're standing firm. So talk a little bit about that season and that phase.
That was difficult.
Yeah.
An A&R guy said to me, because I took the ideas, because I started writing a song like right after she said that, and right after that documentary, I wrote this song called Starlight, and I started writing Commodity, and I didn't have them, they weren't songs yet, so I still owned them. If they were already songs, then they would still be stuck with that team that didn't believe in this idea.
Yeah.
They all got excited about it. I wrote with two of the biggest writers in Nashville. The three of us were in a room together, and they loved the idea. Like, they're like, "Wow, this is so cool. I don't need a Band-Aid for my bullet hole," which I read that about the conflict with Coney in an op-ed by Shannon Sedgwick Davis, who helped take down Coney in many ways and really minimize his impact in the region. A philanthropist from Texas said, sometimes we fly over and we just put Band-Aids on bullet holes. And I was like, shoot, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I want to be involved. And I went to the label, and the A&R guy said, and this is widespread, not just in terms of this issue, but in general, this idea that worship is singing. It's such a weird idea. Like, it's so stupid. It's so obviously, if you look at all about what God says through the prophet Isaiah, through Jeremiah, through Amos, the words that are attributed to Jesus Christ in the Gospels, it's like, I don't want your songs. Shut up with your singing. Like, that is not what I require. I don't require sacrifice. I don't.
Yeah.
Like, for some reason you think that, you've been told that, you've read that, but what I want is justice. I want it to flow down like a mighty stream.
Yeah.
And so wait with all your singing and praying and talking and all of that and preaching, which is what we put 98 or 99% of our tithe money in America goes towards, like, talking and singing and talking the talk. And there's nothing left over for walking the walk, like nothing. I'm not, it's the saddest thing that I've ever experienced. And I don't know if it started because of the church building thing, or if the music industry is driving it. But in the Christian music industry, the A&R guy said, isn't worship singing and all that justice stuff? Like, isn't that just, and at the time I was so confused. I was like, where's he coming from? And
Yeah.
it was 5 years later that John MacArthur wrote that anti-social justice paper. So it was like, there was like 7 years before that. So it was kind of, I stumbled into figuring out where all of that was coming from. And the head of the label is like, why can't you just write these kind of songs? This is what sells. Like
Right.
JE dollar sign, U dollar sign. There's 3 songs that you can write that will work. And I need you to just write those 3 songs over and over again. And then the marketing director said, David, this is a cool idea, but I'm a whore and I need you to give me something that can sell. And so that was a really traumatic experience for me overall.
Yeah.
And so I left. Somehow I was able to get out of the contract, and we've been on our own since.
Yeah. So as you're doing this transition, an individual named Matt with a company, or I guess I don't know, an organization is what we'll say,
Yeah.
called Exodus Road, reaches out to a group of bands and says, "Hey, I want to meet with you guys." And fortunately, you're a man of your word, and the rest are not, unfortunately. And you guys get a chance encounter.
Yeah, and it was in the evening. I was still late though. Yeah, everybody else canceled. The way it works in this particular part of the music industry is NGOs, non-government organizations, usually food, feeding the children ones, which I love the work they do, but they pay bands to represent them. And so I don't know if other managers or bands realized they weren't going to get paid for this, but everybody canceled on this guy. And what's cool, I don't know if you've ever heard this part of the story, because I didn't know this until a year ago, but Matt Parker was a youth worker in Colorado Springs area. And he fell in love with my song All Along on the radio in 08, 09. And he actually, one of the kids in his youth group got hit by lightning and died. And he listened to that song on repeat on the way to have to tell the rest of the youth group and to be with the family. Like, it was a big part of his life.
Yeah.
And so at the same time, all that we just talked about is going on with me. This guy already knows me. And that's always weird as a musician. Somebody kind of knows you.
Right.
And people treat you like they know you too. And I kind of like that, because I enjoy trying to get to know people.
Yeah.
And so he does not know at all. He just thinks we're that kind of band. He doesn't know that I've already written half an album that's about the work he's doing, fighting against sex trafficking, fighting against child exploitation and slavery. And I knew that I wanted to partner with an organization, but I kind of wanted to partner with a big organization like International Justice Mission or Invisible Children. And but then when I took the meeting, and I meet with this guy. He's my age. He has 3 kids, just like me. Sitting across the table from him, he's describing how he, at the time, they'd been part of maybe 100 rescues so far. And he's talking about how he goes undercover, how he wears spy cameras, how he uses technology to find evidence of trafficking. And something just changed in me. Like, once again, all the influences, specifically, if you've ever heard me talk, when Martin Luther King Jr. says, now is the time for us to develop a kind of dangerous unselfishness. That line formed something new inside of me. Yeah. And the power behind it, what made that quote powerful, is they shot that man the next day for taking the cause of poor people and for demanding justice from the government and from the community, from society, for the sanitation workers of Memphis. They killed him because of who he was, and because of that, they told him, don't go to Memphis. He went anyways. And I think all of that came to the surface in that conversation with Matt Parker. And I said, Matt, I don't want to just talk about this. There's too many people talking. There's too many people that are merely talking about things and merely singing. Like, there's nothing behind it. It's not real if I don't join you in some capacity.
Yeah. So, for obvious reasons, your wife is a little bit not excited about the idea of this, right? It's not we'll say a safe environment, right? I mean, this is, operations and relatively dangerous. So talk about that conversation. And then the next morning, her response.
Like, she knew, we'd watched like Machine Gun Preacher, Selma, 12 Years a Slave.
Yeah.
And then I'd watched and read a ton. Like one of my favorite abolitionists, his name's Aaron Cohen. I read a lot of interviews with him. So she knew that it was something I really was thinking about. And I always said in another life, maybe if I didn't have kids, if I was single, if I didn't have a band, if I didn't have a team that I'm financially responsible for.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, I snapped out of that pretty quick. And that's what's really cool about her is, yeah, it took her a bit, but by a bit, I mean like 12 hours, less than 12 hours. Because I went home and said, I think, look at, like, we could do this, like this, people will pay attention to, this. And also how can we ask people to give their lives if we're not giving our lives, if we're just singing from stage? And she's like, well, let me think about it. I was like, Matt is going to be here tomorrow morning for breakfast.
So think quick.
Yeah. And she has her dad was born in Africa, so she has kind of honorary uncles in Kenya, and some of the work helping girls that have been mutilated in Kenya has been a part of me and Anna's personal, more private involvement over the years. And so she said, David's going to join you. This will be our legacy. Like, that was her exact words.
Wow.
And that's really stuck with me.
Yeah. So not everyone listening has a faith background or is a person of faith, but I think something that, and you can talk about from just a decision-making standpoint or from a faith standpoint, is how do you decide what you're being called or invited into versus what it is that I want, right? I think that's a fear for a lot of people is, hey, am I making the right choice, right? I think that's what, you have that pivotal moment where you need to make a choice. And it's like, crap, is it the right one? Is it not?
Yeah.
So how did you go about that? I mean, obviously you were passionate about the topic, but how did you go about saying, yeah, I feel good. This is the right choice. This is where I'm supposed to be stepping into.
This is the right choice. This is the right organization. This is the right particular specific emphasis in the counter trafficking movement.
Yeah.
There's intervention, there's aftercare, there's prevention. And that paralysis, what do they say?
Paralysis by analysis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I and you and anybody that is listening, we all have something in us that's innate. It's woven into the very fabric of who we are. This longing to participate in justice and freedom and mercy. And that is something that I could not say with confidence a decade ago, but I can say with absolute confidence, you want to be involved in some capacity. And if you're a person of faith, then you can attribute that to this design, and this design being most fully realized in selfless actions on behalf of somebody else, in acquainting yourself with grief, putting yourself in proximity with somebody else's sorrow, makes us the most human that we can be. It puts us in line with the new template for humanity, this new life, this new creation, this thing that's making all things new and reconciling everything that's broken back. But if you're not, you can't argue with the evidence that there's some reason why you tear up when somebody does something brave and courageous in a movie. There's something to, so however that came to be over all these years, is it mere altruism, or is there something else going on? Right. Nobody can argue that there's something there. There's a magnetism that's pulling you, that's tugging at your heartstrings. And so if you don't believe in a higher power or creator, then it's merely humanity's mechanism to protect itself by helping the weak, and helping those that have been taken advantage of, and keeping the powerful and the abusively powerful from overrunning everything. Whatever it is, I can't explain it, but I know it exists.
Absolutely. So as you are getting more involved, you end up starting to go on these missions. And something that, and once again, this is just me being naive, but I didn't fully understand, how in some of these cultures, children or people were getting into the situations that they were finding themselves in. And you talked about sometimes it was parents had a loan out and couldn't make the loan payment, and this is how it gets paid. And so talk just a little bit about, some of the things that maybe aren't overly obvious, but that are very much a part of, what you're working to make right.
There's agencies that'll go out into the hill country of Thailand.
Yeah.
And offer parents an opportunity that the parents actually pay to have their kids carted down to the city. And those parents, most of the time, I think honestly believe that their kid's going to be in a hospitality industry but if she's pretty, she's going to end up in the red light district, or she's going to end up in the jungle. And like in Latin America, and the reason I love refugees so much and I care about the plight of refugees is as people cross borders, as they walk through countries, multiple countries, there's a vulnerability there. And those sometimes who are paid to help with that journey end up being exploitive as well. Well, they're exploitive anyways because they take ridiculous amounts of money from people, but then they also pick off girls and sell them into sex trafficking. And here in the United States, like there are cultural things everywhere. And one of the things with that is being made more aware of that we need to shine the light on is as people trust powerful influencers in their life, whether it's a preacher or a camp director or a Christian festival director recently, kids are being taken advantage of and violated in those ways too. And that's, once again, parents putting trust where they shouldn't put trust.
Yep.
Or a school teacher, or it looks different depending on where it is. And I'm not going to blame one culture or another culture. Everybody has an issue. And at the end of the day, there has to be someone looking and watching out and finding out what's happening. And that's what the Exodus Road does.
Yeah. So as you're, over there working on your missions, once again, you're able to sync up and team up with authorities, in these different countries. But my guess is that there's some level of corruption and collusion that can be happening. So how do you kind of sift through that to know who we can be working with, who we cannot be working with, to make sure that the project or, the task at hand can actually come to fruition?
So if you are on our text list, you got a text yesterday about a former police officer that was trafficking several teenage girls, one in particular from the time she was 13 till 16. And that exists here in the United States, that corruption in law enforcement, and in other parts of the world that corruption exists. And I don't speak the language in Thailand, I just kind of have to trust that our team has these valuable relationships with law enforcement, because the only way any organization in the intervention space, and the intervention is going and breaking up criminal networks, the only way that's going to happen is with law enforcement. We're not vigilantes. And so that's a big part of the job, is finding law enforcement. And when we do that, they're never going to say that Exodus Road helped, which is beautiful, because that keeps me a little more safe here at home. It keeps our team safe, because the target then is law enforcement, not the Exodus Road. We oftentimes we're just glorified informants,
Right.
That's all we are on paper, is informants. Hey, we noticed something's going on here. Here's a tip. Well, it's not just a tip, it's a target package with video. It's not anything that civilians going to do, but it looks that way,
Yeah.
And sometimes they'll partner with us, and we'll go in and one of us will get arrested in the sting operation. But that is a hard thing. At some point, you just got to hope and trust. I've looked a lot of law enforcement. I've been undercover with a lot of law enforcement in Latin America. Sometimes these female law enforcement operatives will will pretend to be sex workers. So they get a ton of information from the other girls and women that are there at the parties or the clubs that we're in,
Yeah.
which is amazing. And they do it in such a great and loving way. Um, I've cried with police officers. I've seen a lot, and you see a kindness and you
Mhm.
see a passion in their eyes too. They care about. There's a reason they're in this particular area of work.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one specific interaction that you had with a girl you end up writing a song about, and it was just not that it was different than any other time, but it was just very profound to you. Talk a little bit about that whole experience, and then the song that came from it.
Which part? Which song?
Oh, you referenced it when I was listening to you. Was no, Anna? No, that was your question. What's the
There's I wrote "Lovely" in Latin America, "Sunlight on Her Face." Some of the
you
songs, like,
said you had turned around when you saw her.
oh yeah, yeah, that was early on.
Yeah.
Um, so that was on my first trip. We went out in the jungle, and I was used to more commercial red light districts, and so we're just driving through jungle, and you come through a little village, and it was rare for white guys, for Falang, they call us Falang, in Thailand, to be out in the middle of the jungle. And so we went into this place. It was a dirt floor. It was a tin, like, barn type
Yeah.
place. And I noticed we had tinted out black windows on our black car, and I noticed through the window a girl, and I said, never mind, she's too young. And the guy said, no, we're stopping. And we went in, and they had to go down the street to get our beer.
Yeah.
Tiger beer in Thailand. And we're just sitting there, and there's a couple of young high school age girls that they have told to sit with us, and we're talking to those girls, and then at that point I can talk a little bit using Google Translate,
Yeah.
and most girls say, where are you from? um and it was just, the girl was very shy, and her name was June. And that's just her nickname. That's not her real name.
Yeah.
um and I give her a fake name too. So there's two people pretending to be something we're not, talking, and she's a child. And it was odd for us to be there. Um, some motorcycles pulled up outside, and at the beginning, I was a lot more, suspicious, and more concerned. Like, my radar was always on.
Yeah.
And these guys come in, and I'm thinking the worst.
Right.
And we had just got what we needed. We got them on film saying these two young girls were available for around $60 each for an hour. And then we made up an excuse to leave, and I had to pay. And the 1,000 baht looks like 100 baht. So I'm there trying, I'm shaking, trying to pay for the drinks. And so there's all this adrenaline, there's a little bit of fear, there's so much distraction,
Yeah.
to the fact that I am right in the middle of such a traumatic situation. This girl's trauma, what she has to go through. And I pay for the drinks. And then I look back one last time, and we just had that, just a moment.
Yeah.
And I just felt so helpless. Like, why can't we just take her right now? Why
Right.
do we have to
Right.
leave? And
Yeah.
for anybody listening, the answer to that is, we want to change the culture. We want to make it dangerous for traffickers to traffic young girls. We want to make it dangerous for Americans to fly to Thailand or wherever else we're talking about, to get away with what they can't get away with as easily here.
Yeah.
And that takes making arrests. And so that the raid on that place failed because of corrupt law enforcement, like what your question was earlier. Somebody tipped it off. Like, sometimes we'll get all their phones before we even tell them where we're going on the raid. And if they're humble, if they care enough, sometimes they'll do that, which that's pretty intrusive for a foreign organization to ask for all the local law enforcement to hand over their phones.
Yeah.
But they went back 2 times later, and June was was rescued in that operation.
Wow. So, I mean, I think you've mentioned, there's been over 1,500 people helped, over 800 arrests. I mean, you're making significant impact, but there's so much more to keep going with. And you've decided that, well, if we're going to do a show, we want a portion of what we're generating in revenue from the show to go towards this mission. So talk about that and just the impact that's being able to be made through your music and how that's tying into also what you're able to do with Exodus Road.
It's complicated to grasp what we're doing.
Yeah.
And what I love about it, and specifically your podcast, is that I never planned this pivot.
Right.
And the series of pivots that went with it. And I never truly answered your question earlier, like, how do you decide exactly how to follow your passion?
Yeah.
I don't know, but I know with confidence that the road is paving its way before us as we take steps with confidence that if you attach yourself to what you're drawn to, that magnetism, whatever it is, that quiet voice, that nudge in the direction of freedom or mercy, that it just kind of happens. So I didn't plan any of this. We buy all our band's shirts and kimonos and boho pants, like they're like MC Hammer pants meets a skirt kind of for ladies. Elephant pants, little elephants, elephant neck pillows, I'm not a commodity, necklaces, all this stuff we buy from organizations that the Exodus Road works with. That after a girl is pulled out of trafficking, there's a need for art therapy. There's a need for trauma therapy. There's a need for restoration, for rehabilitation. Sometimes that requires living in a facility for a few months or a year.
Yeah.
And so we partner with 10 or so of those organizations around the world. We're going to make our t-shirts somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And most t-shirts that you and I buy are impacted by slavery in the supply chain somewhere. And so I can say with confidence that not only my t-shirts not funding slavery, as a business owner, that's a big deal. I just heard about somebody that's run their business that they're saving a ton of money by like, there's so many ways to dodge regulations. And as regulations loosen, it's easy for organizations and corporations in the United States to take advantage of slave labor. It's really easy.
Yeah.
As a consumer, I don't know the right response as a consumer, but as a business owner, I can't with a good conscience continue to fund slavery.
Yeah.
And so that's one way that we're participating. And other ways we're recruiting, like in Omaha, where you and I met, we recruited a law enforcement officer. He's been over several times. He works on a task force with the FBI now. So we're recruiting people like him that already are nudged in that direction. We give them an opportunity to go overseas with us in a volunteer capacity, just like me. It's a volunteer capacity. I pay my own way. We recruited like 4 or 5 of those individuals. And then our fan base pours a ton of money into the Exodus Road and contributes to some of the raids that are successful. If I could talk for an hour about just the different ways people are getting creative on how they can raise awareness, which is important. The band's raising awareness, which plays into prevention. Intervention would be helping to assist in someone escaping slavery. And then aftercare and rehabilitation. Like I want to be part of all of it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's so critical, right? I mean, it's one thing to eliminate or remove from what you know, but then what, right? If there's no additional care, I mean, those are very traumatizing and traumatic events. And it's like, well, that needs to be worked through to, get back to a way where you can change the trajectory of their lives, right?
And the Exodus Road recently started Beyond Rescue for that reason.
Yeah.
Specifically for girls that are 18 and older, because there's not a lot of that for them.
Right.
And all of that is really complicated. It's a world that I don't know, I don't. And so I'm thankful that there are professionals that know what happens to somebody that's hurt in a certain way and how to talk through that, how to work through that.
Yeah. David, you've you've shared so many great moments of how you've been able to impact so many lives, one through your music, now what you're also doing through the Exodus Road. You mentioned earlier, so if we text Remedy to, I think it's 51555.
Well, there's a new long
No.
number.
Okay. Well,
I
say it
don't.
out there. I'll put it in the notes as well, but say it out there
Okay.
so at least someone listening could do it.
Well, I don't have it memorized. It's like 727, and that goes on forever.
Sounds good. Well,
Please look it up in the notes. Yeah.
Yeah, I was saying I'll look it up. I'll put it in the notes.
But then, yeah. So if you text that, you'll get, like yesterday, I got a text that said these 5 girls, or I think 7 girls, were rescued in Latin America, and 4 traffickers, one of which was an ex-law enforcement officer, were arrested. And so that's just, sometimes it'll go a week without getting one of those, or 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But it just reminds me of what we're doing. It's real. Not going overseas for a while because of COVID. It's been hard for me because I forget that this is real. Like, this is happening still, and we're still keeping the darkness at bay.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, David, I appreciate your time and all the work you're doing. Keep doing great things, and can't wait to continue to follow your journey and do this again soon to stay up to speed on everything going on in your world.
Thank you, Phil. Thanks for having me on your show.